My name is Don Van Syckle, and you're part of the IHE International Webinar Series, and this is, of course, related to IHE Eye Care. So I want to talk about a little bit of how we want to run the webinar today, and then we'll get started to the presentation. First, I would like to run it in an interactive mode. So what that means is when you do have a question, please unmute your phone and go ahead and ask your question on that at that time. Don't worry about waiting to the end of a slide or end of the presentation. Let's try to be interactive if you have any questions. Also, there are certain members here that have been part of many of the committees that have developed and worked on the IHE standards and IHE framework. So please feel free to add to any of the discussions that you wish to add to. If maybe I left something out that you think was important for the group, please feel free to add. So with that said, let's be very interactive, but also please mute your phones until you're ready to communicate. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm just going to cover the agenda a little bit. We won't talk a lot about it, but we're just going to go over a little bit of the committee itself. We're going to talk primarily about the technical frameworks. So that's going to be the main portion of the presentation today. And then we'll get into a little bit about the way to participate in IHE and the process and how to get involved for those that maybe would like to be involved in the process that currently are not. It says at the end we have a Q&A session. Again, of course, we'll do that, but please feel free to provide your questions at any time. Okay, so let's do a little bit of overview of IHE. First, the scope. We really deal with multiple types of communication between different products, but it's kind of two areas that we focus on. One is a workflow, and that workflow is typically done within a clinic. So it's going to be the workflow between like practice management system, EHRs, archives, between acquisition devices, the instruments and things like this. And it's typically the workflow that you'll see inside of a clinic. Then we also talk a lot about information sharing between clinics. That's typically an EHR to EHR. Those are the two main areas that we address in IHE. There are others, but those are the key ones. As you know, the sponsor is the American Academy of Ophthalmology, so we thank them very much for their support of us for a long time. And as we all also understand, IHE is international. And we have our members are throughout the world, and our goal is always to provide international capabilities, not just local to the U.S. A little bit of a history. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but we'll talk a little bit about what we've done. So we actually started the initiative in 2005, and our first really deliverable was what we called Advanced Eye Care Workflow. And that, again, is part of the workflow within a clinic. And over time, what we've done is we've enhanced the workflow capabilities. So we've created a more simplistic workflow called Basic. We added the ability to do displayable reports, appointment scheduling, and we've just kind of evolved workflow over the time. So what has actually happened is in 2015 and also this year, we actually unified all the different clinic workflow profiles. So there was an advanced, there was a basic, and there was a core, and now we have a unified. And so that's very important for you to understand, because what we've done in IHE is we retired the previous workflow, and with unified eye care, we've taken kind of the best of each feature and we've added to those features, and we've created the new workflow called unified. So that's what we're going to focus on today when we talk about the workflows. The second type of things that we've done, starting in 2012 and then also in later years, is we started dealing with exchanging data between EHR systems. And that's primarily accomplished using HL7, clinical document architecture, CDA capabilities. And these are capabilities that really were selected by the meaningful use organizations. And so we've done a lot of coordination with the meaningful use capabilities as part of these specifications. And so that's kind of the second main type of interoperability that we've enabled within the eye care. And so we're going to get into that in a little more detail also as part of today's discussion. This is just a link to where you can get the IHE documents. Hopefully most of you already know that, but if you have any questions, you can go to the IHE Net website and you're able to get, of course, eye care documents and technical frameworks and so forth. You can also get, all the other specialties, and there's a lot of information at the IHE.net. So let's start talking about some of the details now. So as I said before, the main profile for the workflow, this is a workflow within a clinic, customer's clinic, is really called Unified Eye Care Workflow. And what we've done is we've taken the best features of what we've learned in the past, starting with advanced, basic, and core workflows, and we've kind of put them together to define a more flexible and what we feel a more real-life implementation of the integration between the various eye care systems. And so what we've done is we've gone in, and with some of the success with Unified Eye Care, we've decided to retire the other workflows. Now, let me just briefly mention what retire means. Retire doesn't mean all of a sudden that you have implementations out into the field and I can no longer do this and I'm no longer IHE. That's not true. You're still IHE based on the older workflows. But we really want to encourage you, and we've already seen vendors starting to do this, to really modify and move up to the Unified Eye Care workflow capabilities. And that's where we think the best solutions will be for our customers. Also, as part of Unified Eye Care, this is the profile we're going to utilize, and we're going to expand it when we need to. And so one of the expansions that we've done this year, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, is to really incorporate an XML-based refractive measurements capabilities. And that's been added this year as part of the Unified Eye Care workflow, and that's actually the newest profile that we've created. So when we deal with Unified Eye Care, we've created a concept that was not in the original workflows, and that's called a real-world model. And that's very important to you, because what you have to do now is you don't just conform to actors in the Unified Eye Care, you actually perform to these real-world models as actors in transactions. And so what you have to do as a vendor or a clinic is you have to take a look at your workflow that you want to enable, what type of devices you have, what kind of capabilities they have, and you have to really look at that and decide which model works best for you. Now, there's 3 models, so we'll go through those, 1, 2, and 3. And as we do that, one thing that you need to remember is, as a vendor, okay, you may think, okay, model 3 is the best one for me, let's say. And that fits my strategy, the way my products put together, the best. But you also have to realize that might not be the model that your customer would like. And so you have to look at it and go, okay, even though model 3 maybe is my best model for me as a manufacturer, I really want to sell in situations that might be in model 1 or model 2. And so it's very common, and it's not unusual, that vendors will have their products to support more than one model. And so you need to look at this, you need to evaluate it based on your capabilities and your business plans, but it's important to understand these various models. So I'm going to try to cover those at this point. So Real World Model 1. This is really where the EHR basically creates the DICOM patient list, the DICOM work list. You have a practice management system. You have an archive in the organization, and of course you integrate your eye care devices. This is probably this Real World Model 1 is probably the closest to what we had relative to the workflows in the past. That's most advanced and basic. So let's take a little look at this. So, of course, things start out with a practice management system. And one thing that you have to understand is to integrate with the EHR, there's really 2 types of capabilities that we enable. One is we enable, of course, registering the patient. That's obvious. You can therefore pass the patient demographics. You can update the demographics and so forth. But the workflow is really appointment-based. And so, you register a patient, but then you create an appointment for that patient. You can update that appointment. You can delete that appointment. You can do many things with it. And so to use those capabilities and to enable that capabilities, it's based on HL7 version 2 messages. And the first important thing to understand from a detailed is it's version 2.5.1. So that's an important thing to look into, because a lot of systems started out with 2.3s or even earlier than that. And we basically went through and decided that we wanted to standardize on 2.5.1. And so all the real-world models do this. And it's really the same capabilities. And so you're going to have that level of requirement for all models. And so you basically manage the appointments within the patients between the practice management system and the EHR. So after that is done, then what's going to happen in the RealWorld Model 1 is your EHR basically will create and use DICOM to create work lists onto your devices. So now we're into the DICOM world. So the EHR is really kind of the glue in the middle in this model that manages both HL7 capabilities and also DICOM. And so in this case, it would actually create a DICOM work list down to the eye care device. And of course, we know the advantages of that, and people have seen that for many years about safety and so forth. But at this point, what happens, of course, is that the eye care device, you're able to select a patient, you're able to do your job, whatever that happens to be. Some devices create images, some devices create measurements, whatever it happens to be. And then you want to store the data to a PACS system. And that, of course, is using DICOM also, and then you have the advanced display. So what you need to do here is again, as a vendor, you need to take a look at this, and you need to look at this model. You need to look at your system, where do you fit, and then find out what transactions you support. So that's RealWorld Model 1. RealWorld Model 2 is a clinic or an organization that decides they do not want to, or invest into a image storage or PACS system. So there's no actually PACS here. And so this model enables that capability. And so let's talk about some of the key features and some of the key ideas in RealWorld Model 2. So again, you start out with a practice management system and a EHR. And so the way that they work together is really exactly the same in all models. Okay, you register the patient, but basically it's the HL7 SIU messages for appointments that really convey a lot of data between the two systems. And so that's going to happen. Now what happens then is the EHR does create a work list in DICOM. So again, that's similar to what we saw in RealWorld Model 1. But of course, the main difference is there's no archive. And so because there's no archive, there's some enhanced capabilities that your EHR system has to be able to do. Now, what we've defined in RealWorld Model 2 is the ability for the EHR to be able to store key images and reports on the EHR system. Now, one thing to note to understand is that doesn't mean the EHR is an archive. So in RealWorld Model 1, for example, the eye care devices would send all their data to an archive, and that could be everything that I generate. But the main difference here now is a eye care device, okay, your modality, needs to be able to select key images to store on that EHR. So I cannot have just the capability that says everything that I generate on my device, I'm going to blast to the EHR. That's not allowed as part of RealWorld Model 2. What's really defined is the ability for a user to select the key data, the key images, and the key reports. And so the whole concept here is that the EHR now is able to, of course, deal with the patient and appointments and very much of the information for that patient record, but it also can store DICOM key images and reports on the EHR. Now, when you have this model, there's another thing that is very important, because one of the questions you have to ask is, well, how do I store the rest of my data? If the EHR is not an archive, how do I deal with the rest of the data? And that's now the responsibility of the eye care device. And so, if you look at it, that's kind of been the model for many years before DICOM, right? Before there was ability to even have an image manager PACS type solution, what happens, the eye care devices had strategies to keep data. Sometimes they would, have strategies where they store data on a disk for a while, but then they might put it on a CD or another type of medium. But they have to have a strategy in how to keep their data in the long term. So what happens in Real Model 2 is that strategy still has to be enabled. And so it's up to the devices and the users of the clinic to really determine how to safekeep the data relative to the eye care devices, because we have no PACS to do that. So if you look at the actual technical data, the flow is not that much different. Okay, the technical information is about the same, but of course there's a major difference because there's no PACS capability in the clinic, and that's RealWorld Model 2. RealWorld Model 3. So in this model, what we've done is we've enabled the workflow where an EHR has no DICOM capabilities. So if you looked at the first two models, right, as an EHR, you had to, of course, deal with the HL7 messages to manage the demographics and appointments, but then you had to do some DICOM work. You had to do a DICOM work list, or in some cases, you had to do DICOM store, for example. But in this case, we've enabled now in RealWorld Model 3 an EHR that does not support DICOM at all. So let's take a look at that flow and see what that means to us. So again, we start out with the patient practice management system in EHR. Again, the communications there are exactly the same. So that doesn't change no matter what model you do. But of course, what's next in the flow is typically to generate a DICOM work list, which goes down to eye care devices. So what's going to happen in RealWorld Model 3 now is the EHR uses HL7 message, okay, to give this to a PACS archive. So what's happening now is the PACS system is taking the ownership to generate the DICOM modality work list. So it's no longer in the hands of the EHR. And so the orders that are generated are sent from the EHR to a PACS system, okay, using HL7 mechanisms, again 2.5.1. And then it's the PACS system that generates the DICOM modality work list. So from the eye care's device point of view, they don't really care, right? They're saying, okay, I got to get work lists somewhere in my clinic, and some clinics I may get the work list from an EHR. Okay, I'll configure my system to get it from the EHR. And another clinic, maybe the next clinic, they would actually get it from the PACS system. And so from the eye care point of view, it's really just a configuration change to them for this capability. So at this point now, the PACS system now has kind of raised the bar and being able to convert orders to work list. And they now become a work list server. And so, of course, the eye care device does its normal job, right? It pulls the work list, it takes a look at it, it selects the patient, it creates the output, whatever it happens to be, images, measurements, whatever they do. And then, of course, it uses the DICOM storage to send it back out to the image management system. And of course, you have the display systems that can query, retrieve, and do the job. And so, as you look at this, there's a lot of commonality between these models. But what we tried to do in the workflows, we really tried to talk about, what are the best features that we already had in our other profiles? How is it best to put these things together in an eye care clinic? What are practical solutions that our customers will want? And then create these real-world models that you as vendors are able to conform to, agree on, look to see where you fit, and then you're able to, therefore, interact with unified eye care. And so it's really important to understand, what model do I support or what models do I want to support for my equipment. People have been awful quiet so far. Any questions? Comments? Okay, so let's get a little more detailed. So of course the slides that I showed you before are kind of the nice pretty slides way at the top, but you as a vendor, of course you have to get into more of the details of the IHE specification. And so now we need to get back to what we've seen for years, and that is actors and transactions. So this slide here is kind of showing us that. And so if I am, for example, a practice management system, and I want to be inside of the RealWorld Model 1, 2, or 3, there's really 3 actors that I would take a look at. Okay? Now, just please know, IHE doesn't say that a certain product has to support certain actors. You choose that as a vendor. But we all know there's also a lot of common sense choices. And so that's kind of what I'm showing you here is we've kind of put together the common sense, the typical choice. Of course, you could change this a little bit if you think it fits best for your product. And so let's take a look at this. So if I'm a practice management system, remember what we talked about before. We need to manage 2 things, right? We need to manage patient registration and appointments. Those are the 2 required features that you must do. And so we have 2 actors to do that. We have a patient registration source and an appointment scheduler. And so what's going to happen now is you're going to have transactions between that and an EHR, which is, of course, the patient registration consumer and appointment consumer, in order to integrate that data. Now, as you can see, we're going to have the transactions, so you're going to look at the side, and as a practice management system, I'd look at this and go, okay, whatever patient registration Eye Care 15 is, I better figure out how to do that, because those are the transactions that I need to do to accomplish patient registration. If I want to merge patient IDs, which happens to be an optional feature, I have to do Eye Care 20. And so this, those of you that have been in eye care and you've done this work in the past, these are the typical tables and actors and transactions that you've seen. And this is what, of course, we will test and work through in the Connectathon and the showcases. And of course, finally, the more important place is in your clinic. Now, there's a third actor here that we show here called a charge processor. So what happens, that happens to be an optional capability, but we have the capability to integrate charges between EHRs and practice management systems. And so if that's a feature you want to enable as a practice management system to enable those charges, then you'd become a charge processor. And so that's a very important one. Many systems like that. Your customers like that, of course. And even though that's not required in IHE, it is something that's, people, we know vendors take that role, and we know how important that could be. So that's kind of as a practice management system. Of course, as an EHR, when you want to deal with patient registration appointments, you're receiving data. I'm the patient registration consumer, I'm the appointment consumer. And remember, all those transactions for that are deal with version 2.5.1, and when you're the appointment consumer, they happen to be the SIU messages. So you need to go through and look at that, okay? It's, you can create an appointment, you can update an appointment, you can delete an appointment, you can, cancel it. There's many different capabilities that are possible. And so as part of these 2 devices, a practice management system and an EHR, this is going to be the same type of actors and the same type of transactions for all models. Okay, so one thing to understand is if I'm a practice management system and I can do this, I actually can conform to each model, because there's really no difference for me if I'm a PMS. Okay, it's all the same. Of course, as a EHR, you have to take a look at things beyond this workflow to decide what model or models you wish to support. And so let's take a look at now RealWorld Model 1 in a little more detail than we talked about before. So as you can see, again, you have your actors. Now what I did here is I just show the required actors. So the charge processor, which we saw before, is of course part of the capabilities. It's just not shown here because it's optional. And so when you look at this, now you have to look at, what do I do in RealWorld Model 1? Well, of course, the first thing is the EHR. Remember, in RealWorld Model 1, owns the work list. So that's what you see when you come down from the order filler, where it actually goes in and it has the query modality work list. And so that capability is the capability that's been there from an IHE forever. Okay, that was the first transaction we defined. It was defined way back in 2005, and that capability, it still existed, and of course, is utilized everywhere. And so you need to, just go through again your transactions, and really the flow is, I think, fairly well understood. It's very similar to other flows that we've had, but basically, the EHR generates the work list, the device, the acquisition modality generates the data, which could be images or measurements. It's stored in an archive, and it can be query retrieved by a display system. RealWorld Model 2, again, these same type of figures. I'm not going to kind of repeat everything because I think we've kind of gone through that in these models. But again, what you have to do is you have to really look at and see what model or models fits best for your strategy. Of course, RealWorld Model 2 is where the EHR kind of raises the bar in their DICOM capabilities. So this is where you basically say, yeah, I can do the work list. Yep, I can do all that stuff. But I also can store data on my system, and I can display it to the customer. And so again, you're not an archive as an EHR. You're not required, and you're not, supposed to be able to take everything inside. But what's important here is you're supposed to take these key images and decide what those are, and the user decides that, and then you have to display them to the user. Okay, so you need storage and display capability in order to enable an EHR in RealWorld Model 2. Again, from the modality perspective, the difference for them is they have to be able to select those key images. So this Eye Care 18 transaction, modality images, evidence, key object stored, it's really just nothing more than a DICOM store, but the main difference is I can select which data to store. I cannot just go in and have a modality system that actually just blasts everything that I generate and send it to the EHR. Hey, that's an archive. Okay, so that model works well when you have an archive in RealWorld Model 1 or Model 3, but not for RealWorld Model 2. So that's really the key difference from an instrument, is the ability to select the key data. And of course, you have RealWorld Model 3. Again, you have actors and transactions. The department system order filler, again, no longer supports DICOM at all. So the main difference here is the ability that the image manager raises the bar in their system and says, I can do DICOM work list as a server, and I'm able to then manage the acquisition system. And so this model, again, RealWorld Model, takes a look at, and if you have a organization that has an EHR that wants to purchase an image manager, but of course they have no DICOM capabilities, this really then enables that image manager to take that work list responsibility and to enhance workflow greatly in that type of clinic. So, Model 1, Model 2, Model 3. So what I'm showing here is a table. I don't want to spend a lot of time in this table. But those of you that have already done IHE, you will kind of understand this table. Of those of you maybe that are new, this will be like, wow, what is this guy? But what I want to do is spend just a few minutes to make sure we know how to read this table. This table here is very important to you because this is the real specification. All these pretty pictures and the arrows and workflows and things, those are good, and they really help you understand where you fit, but they don't really give you your requirements. So it's this table, and of course there's other tables, but this is a key table that tells you what you need to do in order to be within Unified Eye Care. And so, of course, let's take a look at it. First thing you have is your actors. Well, we kind of saw in the pictures kind of some of the actors that you may want to play. And so you have to look at and see what actor or actors fit best for your product. So that's point number one. Then point number two, you have the transactions. And then normally what happens is then you have the transactions, and that's kind of it. But what you got to remember now is we really say, but to do unified eye care, it's not good enough just to know that. You have to know which real-world model I want to fit in, or of course, maybe more than one. So what you have to do now is you have to look at the actor, the transactions, and then the model. And this model here is where you say things are like required or optional. And so now you can take a look at this and you can say, okay, if I'm real world model 1 and I want to be a department system order filler, kind of like that's part of the EHR role, I have to do this patient demographic update, I have to query from modality work list, I have to let people know the procedures are scheduled, okay, and those are required features. And the fourth feature is not required, okay, but of course that fourth feature may be required in another model, and it is. And so basically, pick your model, pick your actors, pick your transactions. Oops, sorry, picked the wrong button there. Of course, each actor has this defined. Any questions or any comments on unified eye care? Okay, so just to let you know where that's at. We called it new, but actually we had multiple implementations start this and show this last year, and we do know there's vendors that have been working on this to enhance their products to this workflow this year also. So we're really expecting to get different level of implementations on unified eye care, and people were really happy with the feedback we received from the real world. Okay. As part of unified eye care, what we've also done is we've enhanced it with refractive measurements. So we all know that refractive devices, lensometers, keratometers, different types of devices, they're kind of smaller devices. Some of them don't have a lot of computing power up front to do maybe some of the transactions that we define. And so what has happened now is we've actually gone in and defined a workflow for those type of devices. And what's different now than what we've seen in many of the other transactions that we define is the output of those devices are actually based on an XML-based specification from the Japan Atomic Instrument Organization called Joya. And so this is an XML-based specification for transferring the data from those refractive devices. Now, basically in the real world, what happens is a lot of XML type solutions exist today, but they're all proprietary. Okay, so what it basically means is, if I'm device, vendor A, might have an XML solution based on some of these devices, and I can send them out to an EHR, and they integrate that. But then the same type of device from vendor B might have an XML-based solution, but of course it's a different XML stream. And so one of the important things that we decided we wanted to do is by selecting the Joya specification is we can now enable common formats for all refractive devices. And so we want to help eliminate all the custom connections that we've had to do throughout the years to get this data into our EHR systems. And that's really one of the big pushes with this profile. So in order to do this, we've enabled kind of two capabilities. Okay, one capability is to incorporate those refractive measurements when the device actually does not know the patient ID. Now, of course, we wish that would always happen. They would know all the identifiers, and that causes some difficulties. But we know the practicality of the world is sometimes this cannot happen. And so we've enabled now a workflow. And of course, there's certain requirements there to make this happen, but we've enabled the workflow without a patient ID. But of course, the second workflow that we enabled has it where the refractive measurement devices are able to obtain a valid patient ID, and you're able to do that and include that in the Joya specification. But a main portion of this is let's get the formats of those XML devices the same, okay, so we can reduce customization. So again, let's take a look at some of these pictures to kind of see the flow and how this is accomplished. So the first one, remember the first flow is, we are able to integrate refractive measurements between an EHR and the refractive device, but we don't have a patient ID on the device capability. Okay, so let's take a look at that flow. So if we're going to enable that to our system, of course, the first thing you have is you still have patients and appointments. And so that workflow is no different. Okay, so all the things we talked about in RealWorld Model 1, 2, and 3 relative to integrating the practice management system in the EHR for the demographic appointments are exactly the same here. So now, if I'm a practice management system and I implement this, I actually support all the models in Unified Eye Care because there's no differences for me. Of course, that's not true for the EHR. They have to do more things. But from the practice management system point of view, it's all the same. So we manage the patient. So what happens now, though, is that patient, of course, needs a measurement from a certain refractive device, or maybe more than one. So the first key to this with no patient ID rule is this, is you must be able to establish the patient context between the EHR and the refractive device. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. The bottom line is this. In today's world, without the standardization of the XML data from the refractive data, most systems, most EHR systems and refractive devices have come up with some kind of solution in their clinics to establish that patient context. I mean, we all know if I receive a lensometry measurement, I don't want to, I don't want to put that measurement to Len Fellhofer when it's really Jane Smith. And so you basically have to establish the patient context first in order to receive that Joya XML stream. Now, how you do that is completely outside of IHE. And so all the ways that you accomplish that today, and for those of you that have implemented this type of workflow, you've been there, done that. You basically have to still do that. We're not able to solve that workflow situation differently than it is today. So you establish the patient context. Then once you establish that patient context, then what happens is whenever they generate the refractive measurement, they use the Joya-based specification to send that to the EHR. Then, of course, the EHR needs to import that measurement into its database. Now, as part of this workflow, what we've done is we've actually worked with the Joya organization to add a data element to help understand some of this difficulty around the patient ID. So what happened is we actually added a new attribute. We'll look at it a little bit later. It's called patient ID source. But what we've done is we've actually raised the bar from the Joya specification, and we've made that a required data. So what we'll learn more later what that means, but in this workflow, what it means now is when I know I'm a refractive device and I have no mechanism to obtain that real patient ID, I have to set this patient ID source to called unreliable. So what that does is it lets the EHR know, okay, that I cannot rely on the patient ID field, which is part of that XML stream, because it's bogus, it's not right, it's not the real patient ID, okay? And you have to be able to set that flag, that field, so the EHR knows that information. So that's something that we've done to try to, it doesn't fix the problem that you don't know the patient ID, right? I still have to establish that patient context, but it identifies it and makes it clearly known, hey, you know what, you cannot rely on this ID, make sure you're able to incorporate it into your database properly. So that's kind of the first workflow. The second workflow is really pretty much the same, but of course now the refractive device has the ability to obtain a valid patient ID. And so again, we have that field that has the patient ID source, and it's actually set to three possibilities, three examples. One is auto device. Okay, so that's like, for example, let's say my device system has a barcode scanner, and you're able to, and the clinic has the ability to run the barcode, and in that barcode you have a patient ID that identifies the patient for this measurement, and you're able to obtain the patient ID that way. Okay, that's one possibility. Another possibility is we have an optional feature which enables what we call the automatic patient list. That actually uses DICOM modality work list. It's a simplified DICOM modality work list because it really is, there's no order here. It just deals with patients' data. But basically, it's a feature that is possible as part of this workflow. And then the third capability is the one that we really don't like, but we know sometimes it's practically what it has to have, and that's a manual typing it into the refractive device. So you have three ways kind of to obtain that ID. And of course, the key is that you do have a valid ID, and you're able to therefore send that to the EHR. And the EHR can now use that ID to import those measurements into the database. So that's what this workflow does. Now, one of the practical scenarios around these refractive measurement instruments are that, again, a lot of them don't have a lot of computing power in front of them. So we all know that it's kind of common sometimes to have a computer to help incorporate that data into the system. And so what we define is we define an actor for that, and it's called the Refractive Measurement Source Importer. So this is an actor that, of course, many real-world solutions may utilize. And so this actor then has the requirement to actually send the official transaction in eye care, in the refractive measurements eye care workflow. And of course, what's going to happen there, as you see here, is you're going to somehow, as an importer, connect to the instrument device, and you'll probably do that in a proprietary mechanism. So that means the device itself actually does not support the Joya data stream, but it uses its proprietary data stream. It sends it to this importer device. It's probably a computer somewhere, right? And this importer is able to then convert that data over to the Joya data stream and include a valid patient ID as part of that transaction. And so, of course, we expect many real-world solutions to have a device such as this source importer that we define here. So that's not going to be uncommon, and that's going to be very, very, very practical as part of the solution.
Hey, Don, can I interrupt you? This is Jamie.
Yes.
We have a question from the Eye and the EMR folks.
Okay.
What level of integration do existing devices have with Joya XML today, going back to the Joya discussion?
Right now with the Joya is there's certain devices, especially in Japan, okay, where this started, that have implemented the Joya specifications. What's happening is the good news is as part of our team, we actually have 4 refractive vendors that are part of our team that developed this. And so as part of this work, what we did is we did a thorough examination of the Joya specification. Okay, so what happened is today most of them don't conform to that. Okay, but we already know some of the vendors have started working to convert some of their data. Now, what's going to be the practicality of that? Well, you have thousands of devices already out there that don't support it yet, right? But what's going to happen now is these importer type products and so forth are going to come out. We think some of them will come out soon to enable this. But at this time, this is not a worldwide solution that everybody's done. If it was, then this would have been a slam dunk. But we're encouraged. All I can say is we're encouraged with the feedback that we've gotten because we basically have talked to the main vendors relative to this. Okay. Now, some vendors are on this call today that are working on this as part of their products, okay? But, you know, you need to kind of work through them, and people need to say that from a product perspective. So I know that's not the perfect answer. The perfect answer was, yeah, everybody already does this now. Well, no, that's not true, okay? But it's definitely started. Any other question on that? And anybody else want to comment on how I responded to that question? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that Joya specification. So a couple things I want to say to make sure we're clear. So what has happened is Joya has been out for multiple years, and there's definitely vendors, especially that have releases in Japan, that have supported this format. Okay. The first release was release 1.0, and what that release was is that was a conversion of their specification to English, because before it was purely in Japan, Japanese language only. Now, what happened is that version 1.0 is the version that the IHE team reviewed. So what we did is we did a thorough review of that specification. So it wasn't one of those things that we went in and just said, okay, yep, they said they can define how to do, refractive measurements, keratometries, lensometers, etc. We basically went in and looked at that specification in detail. And so as part of that work, what happened is there's certain clarifications that we thought needed to be generated and a few extensions. And so what happened is we worked with the Joya organization. We worked very well. We're very happy with that cooperation between ourselves and them. And what happened is the Joya organization took 90 or more % of our clarifications and extensions and added that to their specification. And that's now version 1.5. So our point to you is the first release, which is 1.0, which we did the review and is also on the IHE website, is not the version that we are now using. So what has happened is we've created a change proposal which now incorporates version 1.5, which really is nothing more than the incorporation of the work of the feedback that we gave Joya. So my point to you as a vendor, and those of you, I tried to send this out earlier to the eye care world, but if you didn't pay attention to it or didn't understand it, you need to understand it now. If you're doing this work, look at that change proposal, because you have to go to the 1.5 version to implement and not the version 1.0. We'll eventually get that change proposal incorporated in through the IHE process, and it will show that, but please note that. And again, this specification is open. It's on the IHE Japan website, and you can get this freely, okay, with no restrictions, no issues. So please make sure you follow the work of the change proposal and use version 1.5. So these XML file-based specifications, what are they? Well, one term that they use is they call it data classifications. So you as a vendor, you're really implementing these data classifications. And what can happen now is when I create a file based on this XML stream, you can actually send data from a device that has more than one data classification. So if I have a device that can do multiple types of measurement capabilities, or one of those importers that kind of accumulate this data, you can actually send files for the same patient of more than one data classification. So I could get a refractive measurement and a keratometry all in one. Or systems may send those separately. So of course you have to manage that as they are. Now, one thing that's important to understand is the transport mechanism is not defined in Joya. So we all know that these refractive devices have many different ways that you as an EHR get this data. Okay, you get this data with files, sometimes you get this data with FTP, sometimes you do it over TCP network, sometimes in RS-232. There's all sorts of ways. We debated, we went through that, and we basically decided to not define that mechanism for IHE either. So all the hook and crook and the way to get that XML data stream into your system still exist. Okay. I think more and more people are talking about using the typical network TCP/IP. The key is that if the device is not able to give you the patient ID, you got to make sure you establish that patient context correctly so you don't import the wrong measurement to the wrong patient. So we did a thorough review. We were pretty happy with it. And so what has happened now, it's been updated. There's a version 1.5. But again, the whole goal now is to have common format for all these refractive devices. And that's the long-term goal that we have by enabling this workflow into IHE. Okay, and we're already seeing some vendors looking to try to implement this, so we're pretty encouraged with this. This was just released a month ago. Okay, so the official release.
We have another question. What is going to happen to DICOM refraction?
Right now, we don't 100% know that answer. So at this point, and this is part of the decisions that need to be made as part of the planning committee in IHE, is right now we're not planning on trying to update any of the DICOM refractive measurement SOP classes and IODs. Now that could change. We do know some vendors have implemented those, okay, and those vendors that as an imaging device that have implemented those have been part of this XML discussion. Okay, you know, I'm not going to list vendors. I think you probably know those vendors, but I'm not going to list them as part of this presentation here. But the bottom line is you probably are still going to deal with both worlds for a while, okay? And whether or not this will overtake it, we think probably yes. That's kind of the thought process of the group. But, you know, the world is going to have to make that decision. Right now, there's no plans to update or to enhance the DICOM refractive DICOM device, objects at this time. Good question, Abiel. Now, also as part of the Joya specification, the team is actually working together to add a new data classification. I don't have this on the slide, but we're actually working to generate a classification for a autophoropter. So right now, the team is working to accomplish that. So again, we have multiple people. There's multiple people on this call that are part of that team, and there's many people that are not on this call that are part of that team. But we're actually working together to create a data classification for an autophoropter. Now that's going to take a little while. We're getting to the point where we're actually trying to finalize the data elements and the type of tests that can be included. And then once we do that, then we have to, of course, convert it to the Joya format and get that kind of go through their organization, get it approved. So that probably that might not be approved by this year. It may, but that's one of those enhancements that we're going to work with Joya to incorporate into their specification. Now here is a table from the Joya specification to give us, you know, their rules. Now, you know, just like any standard, they have their own format. You have to go in, you have to learn that format, you have to be able to learn how to read it and all those things. But basically, as you can see, it's a XML-based stream. And so what happens is they have these data classifications, and there's also above those, by the way, is you have what's called common data. That's where you have the patient name and all that stuff. But you basically go in, and it's an XML stream, so it's very simple, and you have a description of the data, you have kind of a name of the data, and then you have an encoding and a requirement. This necessity here is actually the requirement here. And so basically this is what we had to review as vendors to decide to incorporate the specification. But what I can tell you is we did a very thorough review. We worked on it very hard. We spent multiple months reviewing this to go through each and every line to make sure we were comfortable to incorporate this into IHE. And we're shaking our heads up and down, feeling pretty good. One of the extensions I talked about before, because it's so difficult sometimes to manage that patient ID value in these devices, is we've added a field called patient ID source. So this is a field that was not in version 1.0. Okay, it is now in version 1.5, and that's why it's important for you to look at that 1.5, because it's now part of the official specification. But it's of course optional, but now it's there. So we actually in IHE require the device to fill in that field. Okay, so we want to say, hey, you know what? If you use Joya and you're an IHE-based acquisition, refractive measurement device, you have to let us know how this patient ID was obtained, because the bottom line is a difficult thing in the workflow. So of course it could be unreliable, like our first workflow we talked about. And typically when it's unreliable, the thing is they still have to fill in the patient ID field. And so what we found out is what products typically have been doing is they've been putting in a exam number, a device generated number, which has absolutely nothing to do with the patient ID, although it's in the patient ID field. And that's a real world practicality that was a kind of a problem. And so this is part of the way to help us identify that scenario. So they are required to set it to unreliable. Then of course we had the other ones which we've talked about in the past: manual, auto device, auto patient list. This is a requirement if you're IHE compatible in this level. So we raise the bar of Joya. Now in reality, that's the only attribute that we made required that is optional in the Joya standard. Okay, we provided a lot of clarifications to help people better understand things, and so they added those clarifications. But we didn't take any other field and add it to the spec and make it required, or we didn't raise the bar in any current field that exists to make it required. So this is really the only extension. Now with that said, we have done optional extensions. So what we did is we went in and we added things like, for example, a lens label, which is an optional capability to actually put a label on glasses. So you can, say, hey, these are my reading glasses, these are my whatever glasses. So we did, add certain capabilities, but they were all optional. This one we made required. So that's all that I want to talk about from the point of the workflow, unified eye care and refractive measurements. Any more questions, any comments from the team? Arthur, Mark, Chuck, you guys were, heavily involved in these things. Do you have any extensions or anything you would like to add? Okay. Okay, next topic. Now, if something comes in your mind, by the way, and you want to ask a question based on, some of the talk that we've already had, of course, just do so, and we'll go back and we'll cover it. So the next part of the webinar that I want to talk about is now relative to the EHR to EHR exchange for patient record data. So as we know, our customers have dealt with, and U.S. EHR type vendors in a way, have dealt with requirements from the government, U.S. government, relative to meaningful use. And part of those requirements are the exchange of documents for patient records. And so, yeah, we all know that there's certain bills have been passed or certain requirements and capabilities that you vendors have had to do relative to that. Now, one of the difficulties from the eye care world is the requirements that are being stated into the rules really don't include any ophthalmic data. So yeah, it deals with important things like medications, allergies, you know, what kind of problems do I have, vital signs, things like this. Very important to a patient's health, we know that. But there's nothing that is specific to eye care information. And so what happened is the eye care team then went in and looked at the meaningful use, and we said, hey, you know what, let's follow the meaningful use specifications, but let's now add eye care information to MU, to meaningful use. And that's what we did in this workflow. And so to do that, we basically created what we call encounter documents and summary documents. And these documents are based on the same specification as MU2, so they're based on the HL7 CDA, consolidated CDA. And so what we did is we took their required documents and we expanded them with eye care data. And so the two key names that you need to learn to accomplish that is called IHE Eye Care General Eye Evaluation, or G. Okay, that's basically the encounter for the patient. And then we also have an IHE Eye Care summary data. And so again, what we did is we took the exact specifications that MU2 defined as part of the consolidated CDA, HL7 CDA, and we've enhanced them to include eye care data. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the first one is G, General Eye Evaluation. So this basically covers a routine adult eye exam. So it's really captured per visit. So this is something now, you know, if I've had a patient that's gone 3 times in 2 years, there would be 3 of these documents typically created, okay? So as part of these documents, of course, it's going to have things that are required by the meaningful use, some of the chief complaint, the medications, allergies, and so forth. But of course, what we've done now is we've added the eye care specific data to this. And so you have things like ocular history, you have visual acuity, you have IOP, refractive measurements, blah, 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 okay? Now, what we've done as part of the specification is our goal was to enable this document to support both MU2 and the IHE Eye Care data we need. So the point is that you can be MU2 compliant with this G document, but include eye care. And so that's very important. So now that we can exchange that between eye care type EHRs, which can read our stuff, but you can also exchange this to a system that doesn't. Because one of the requirements of the MU2 capabilities is that if I'm a system that receives this data, you know, I could ignore the stuff I don't know. So a EHR that doesn't understand the eye care specific data would receive this information also. And of course, they're supposed to be able to display it. So at least you can incorporate that type of stuff. But of course, what we prefer is our type of systems that are able to use this data, understand this eye care information, and then also to incorporate that into our EHR and into our medical records. Okay, so you basically take the required MU2 stuff, you add the eye care information that we need to do. Now, of course, is there a question? No, okay. Now, of course, a lot of this eye care data now is structured data. And so what you'll see is many of the structured codes are based on both SNOMED and LOINC. And so, you know, that's not 100% everything, but it's a large portion of it. And so what happens now is we use, you know, SNOMED to encode a lot of the concepts that are in eye care, and we also use LOINC. And so you're going to basically be managing those codes a lot doing this system. I do, by the way, Abdiel, I just saw your message, so I saw your questions. The answer is no, we have not. Okay. Now, that's actually a good question and a good point. So let me read Abdiel's question. He basically says, have we worked with the government to get the validators to work with G or Eye Care Summary? And the answer is we have not. That's a good question, and that's something maybe we can take on the side, and it would be kind of useful to try to run some of the validators on some of this work to see how it works. They should pass, because if you do the main portion correctly, the whole goal of this is that it would be able to pass. But of course, they're going to ignore all the stuff that's eye care specific. So that's a good question. So the answer is no, I haven't seen it done yet, but it's not a bad project to see if maybe someone wants to kick that off. But strategically, that's exactly what we're trying to enable. Okay. Eye Care Summary, same concept. Okay, what happens is MU2 defines a patient summary, so we took that, we enhanced it with the key eye care data as part of a summary record, assessment and plan, IOP, meds, things like this. So here are the eye care specific extensions that we added to G. So you can see it's pretty extensive. Okay, you have the ocular history, the ophthalmic meds. Okay, we know there's a medication inside of the general part of the CDA, but we also added in ophthalmic medications. Of course, the big thing is the physical exam, which has visual acuity, vision testing, blah blah, this long list here. And so the goal here is to be able to again add eye care specific data to what currently exists as part of MU2. Now, as part of working with these documents in IHE, one of the things that you have is, you have actors again. Well, the actors are pretty basic. I'm a content creator, I create G, or I'm a content consumer, okay? And so as part of the content consumer, you as a vendor, you need to take a look at that, because you need to decide, what am I going to do when I receive these documents? How good am I going to incorporate them? So let's talk a little bit about that, just to kind of get that into your heads. Okay, as a consumer, the basic option, which is an option, by the way, you have to do for MU2, is you have to have kind of like a view option. And a view option basically means I can just spit it out and show the doctor everything that someone gives me. Now, that's the minimum, so it's almost like exchanging a piece of paper, right, where you go in and I take it and I can show you what was given to me, but I don't incorporate it in my system. So that's called the view option. So at a minimum, you basically have to be able to do that. Okay. Now, in reality, we want our systems, especially relative to the key eye care data, to be smarter. And so we want the ability to import certain data elements and certain sections. And so here you see this document import and section import. So go back to your experiences for MU2 for you EHRs. As part of MU2, they actually require you to import some of the data. They say basically, hey, you know what? I don't want you just to view the patient's medications. I want you to be able to import that into your medical record. Well, the same concept now for our eye care specific data. Okay, we don't require that. We didn't raise the bar to say you must import certain things here. But the reality is this. That's what we really want. Okay, if you're going to incorporate a patient's data, especially if, let's say, someone is actually moving to you, right? They're going from one clinic to another or whatever. Incorporating this into your EHR can be very useful to your customer. And so the ability to do this section import option to many of these things, hey, I can import visual acuity, I can import refractive measurements, lensometries, blah, 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 becomes very important. So that's something that you as a vendor should really look into. Yeah, you can get into the game and just do a view option, and that's probably what you do in the beginning, because that's easy. That's basically just taking the style sheet and being able to run it. Okay, my guess is every one of you can do that if any of you have worked in the meaningful use world. Okay, you can probably do that day one. But the real work is when you import this. So please take a look at that when you do these imports, when you become a content consumer, because that's the real work, and that's what we really want in the long run. And that's what your customers want. So of course you're going to have big tables like this. Now, I'm not going to try to, go through this table, okay, but it's kind of like the other table. This is the real spec, where everything that we've shown you so far is kind of, what to help you understand it, but this is the real spec. So you really, in the CDA, they call them templates. You have template names, and so of course you have mandatory, required, conditional, optional templates, and so forth. And so to be part of IHE, of course we raise the bar, and there's certain things that are required in order to do this. So if you look at the yellow, you see that there's an ocular history, the ocular physical exam, which is, the visual acuity, the IOP, the refractive measurements, and so forth, and the medications. All of those are extensions to meaningful use. So what happened is you see all this other stuff, okay, where you have allergies, you have chief complaint, you have interventions, you have blah, blah, blah. All this other stuff here is what is currently defined for the progress note in the consolidated CDA. So what we basically did is we said, okay, hey, you know what, we take the specification as it exists in MU2, okay, fine. And then we have to look at each one and decide, one, do we want to raise the bar on any individual one? Okay, very few of them that we did. But of course, we added the eye care specific data. And so those of you, again, that have implemented this as part of your process, this should be familiar to you. We wanted to make it as familiar as possible so it wouldn't look like a brand new thing. And so that's how we've illustrated this. So it's pretty much like you see some of the documents in the CDA world. So basically, you have this for your eye care summary and your G. Now here's an example of the physical exam. So, from a G point of view, the real eye care extension, the major portion of it is the physical exam. So as you can see here, we have a lot of capabilities, the visual acuity, the testing, refractive measurements, and so on. Now, the way that this is set up for you is it doesn't mean if I do an exam for a patient, I'm going to fill in all these things. Now, if I do the first exam for the patient and I'm doing a real thorough exam, I may end up doing the vast majority, almost everything here. Okay, fine, great, you get a whole bunch of data. But, in follow-ups, what may happen is I may do something very simple. I just may do a visual acuity only, or I may do a refractive measurement only. And so these Gs could be very thorough, especially if it's someone's first examination, because you may be capturing a whole lot of this data, or they could be very light. So, that's all okay. And so the follow-up may not, have all this information inside of it. And so that's why, again, it's important for you to understand is this is not a history here. So, for example, it's not going to give you all the refractive measurements that we've done for this patient. It's really encounter-based. So G is going to capture the data that I got today for this patient. Okay? And so you might have multiple Gs in order to actually see what has been done for this patient over time. Any questions, any more questions or comments relative to the CDA document exchange? Okay, let me talk a little bit where this is at. So what is happening is we actually defined G not relative to meaningful use multiple years ago. And what happened is some people worked and did some implementations on that, but we really made the conscious decision to say, hey, you know what, we really need to synchronize this with meaningful use in order to make this more useful for our clients and, you know, the vendors yourselves. And so what has happened now is that has been done, and we've had some testing of this done in some of the connectathons. We haven't had a thorough test yet, okay, but what we have seen is we've seen vendors implement part of this, and we've seen them implement it based on MU2. We've seen them implement some of these eye care exam stuff. And basically, we know certain vendors are working to accomplish that this year. Again, we're not here to list vendors, but I've been told by 2 EHR vendors at least that they want to generate the ability to generate a full G this year. So I'm hoping to see that in our Connectathon and potentially the showcase. But you know, they'll have to make that decision. Okay. So that's kind of where I've seen that today. Okay. At this point, I've completed the part of the webinar to talk about the profiles that we have in eye care, the key profiles. So again, I want to open it up. Does anybody wants to do any further comment, any question, anything to address this? Okay, so I see another question. So I did see that, so let me read it and we'll talk about it. For your G fields in the consolidated CDA, are those template IDs values locked in? Do you have to register those template ID values, and is there a way to prevent other groups from generating their own implementation of the same values? Okay, so good question. So the answer to that is the template IDs are locked in for the eye care specific ones. And another organization could not use those template IDs. Now the reason why is what happened is part of generating these IDs. So let me go back to that. Okay, I'm on the wrong one here. So for example, you see all these section IDs. So visual acuity, this ID to identify that and so forth. So what has happened is part of IHE, as part of IHE, IHE has been given a number for generating unique UID values, okay? And so what has happened is the IHE organization then has passed on a component to the different groups, such as eye care. So what actually happens now is we in eye care have a unique ID value that we've been given from IHE. And so what happens now, it's up to us to manage that to make sure we don't mess that up. Okay, so actually I have a spreadsheet to know how this is done. I basically have a spreadsheet that for any ID that we want to generate in the IHE Eye Care world, I need to keep track of. And so what happens is every time I generate one, I put it on the spreadsheet, I make sure it's unique, and because we've been given this unique route from IHE for eye care, it should never be reused. Of course, could someone make a mistake and reuse it? The answer is yes, but that's very low probability, and it should probably never happen. Okay. So good question. And by the way, you know, that's a good detailed question. So, you know, of course, I know that you understand a lot of the real rules around a CDA in order to do this. Let me kind of add on one more point. As part of these documents that we generated, so for example, as part of this G-based thing, it was based on a CDA progress note. So what would actually happen as part of the implementation is you would have a template ID that's defined as the progress note. And so that's why vendors that don't understand our extensions can still process this. Because what happens is they actually look at this document, they see a template ID for the progress note, and so they can implement things based on the progress note rules. Yeah, they won't know how to import the ocular history or the ocular physical exam, but they'll know how to deal with the other parts of the spec. And so we were very diligent to making sure we tried not to break any of those rules so that systems that don't know our information could still at least receive this data. They could at least put it in their system and, at least do the view option. And then as part of that view option, they'd be able to show the ocular data, even if they cannot import it. So those IDs are very important to that. Any other question? That was a good question. Any others? Comment? Okay. So again, if something comes up in your head about a detailed question relative to the profiles or the documents, the CDAs, please just bring it up and we'll go back and we'll address that. So right now what I want to do is just spend a few minutes talking about participation in IHE. So a lot of the people here already know that because you've done so. So I want to thank you for that, for those that are on the call, and those that are not on the call, I want to thank them also. But basically what happens is, organizations, join IHE. There is a small fee now to join IHE, and, we encourage you to do so, okay? And we basically have two committees. We have a planning committee and a IHE technical committee. Now, what really happens is the planning committee, which is the co-chair, Linda Wiedemeyer, is really the committee that determines the projects we're going to work on for the years. Okay, so what happens is this group meets face-to-face at the AAA show, wherever it happens to be each year, and then they're the group that kind of works together to determine what's going to be next. Okay, I will answer your question in just a second, Adam. Okay, I'll come back and answer that question. So, so what happens now is part of the planning committee. They determine what we're going to do each year. Okay, they also deal with planning the Connect-a-thon and the showcase. They deal with the education. This is part of the planning committee right now. Okay, and they determine the priorities. And so this is kind of like the planning committee is kind of like the marketing group of the IHE Eye Care team. This is the business headset. The next group is the technical group. And so this is the group now, which is led right now by Mark Horton, is really developing the profiles for eye care. And so what typically happens is we have a big IHE technical committee, but then we typically generate subcommittees for the different items that we're working on. So, of course, there was a subcommittee for the unified eye care work. There was a subcommittee for the refractive measurements, subcommittee for the CDA work, and so on. And so basically that's what happens. And so you as a vendor, you need to look at this, and everybody should be part of the planning committee because you want to have your voice for the business point of view. And then you should have your members part of the technical committees to help make things go through. Now we have a question back on some of the other things, so I want to address that now. So the question is from Adam, so an interocular pressure is a required element, but we do not include the data if it does not exist. So let's talk about that. Okay, so what happened is, I'm sure what Adam saw was this right here, this line here, interocular pressure. Oops, hit the wrong button here. So let's talk about this. Now, this is a specification of how CDA defines required. Okay, so one of the confusions here is, required in one standard may not be the same as in another standard. Okay, so you have to kind of understand the standard that you're reading. So when you see a required 0 to 1, what does that basically mean? That basically means this: you as a vendor are required to support that and be able to create that. But we know there's certain cases where it does not exist, so you do not have to send it in those cases. Okay? Or there's other capabilities in the CDA at times called null value, when you don't have a value. So what happens is this R is meaning, hey, Adam, you as an EHR, you got to be able to do an interlocular pressure. So if you decided to do G and you say, you know what, I can never get the interlocular pressure because I don't know how to put that in my system, then you couldn't do this. But if the instance that you're not actually enabling it, you know, they're not testing interlocular pressure, you don't have to include it. And so that's what the 0 to 1 means. Now, those conventions are really conventions based on CDA stuff, okay? But we also do have some education portions of those conventions in the specification. So hopefully you could read that, you would look at that, and maybe understand what I said, okay? So in this case, it's not a problem, okay? And whenever you have that 0 to 1, you're okay. And that's why it's all 0 to 1 here, because we basically said, you know what, we want you to be able to do everything here. I want you to do it all. But it doesn't mean in the individual instance of an eye exam, you may do that. Okay, and that's why it's all 0. So for example, you know, a little more education, when you look at this table, you have required, look at medications. Entry requires, it says R 1 to 1. So what that says is that entry has to be there. So if you cannot leave that one out. Okay, so that medications entry required is 1 to 1. However, what I will tell you is part of the CDA, they also have the ability to do what's called null value. So you have to include that entry, but it could have a null value. So those are CDA type rules. And so those are things you need to learn, okay? And that's part of this process, okay? Okay, so back to the eye care organization. So we basically, when you join IHE and you want to do eye care work, these are the committees you're going to work on. Everybody should be part of the planning committee, okay? And we like to have someone from each organization as part of the technical committee, and then of course certain people that really work well in certain groups, depending on what the topic happens to be. So typically what happens is when we work on a profile, you know, what we do in eye care is we tend to have phone conferences only. Some organizations will have like meetings where they'll get together, you know, like 5 times a year for 3 or 4 days at a slot. We found that that doesn't work well for our eye care team, so we do it with TCONs. And so, you know, it's important to understand that, you know, it's good and bad, right? We get a momentum going because we tend to have, if we're working hard, we'll have a TCON each week, and we'll try to do 2 hours, you know, each week. So that allows us to get together to work, allows time for certain people to maybe do some things, you know, while we're not together, and then come back and review and work on that. An annual cycle for a profile typically takes, you know, this is all, you know, gauging, but around 18 months, sometimes a little less, sometimes more, okay? But basically, it's a TCON kind of mechanism. So I don't want to go through a lot of this. I think most people here know this process, but you know, just very quickly, the planning committee decides what to do. Then once that, it goes to technical committee. The technical committee has to create a document. We go out for public comment, so people have the ability to comment on it, and then we have a trial implementation. Now that's very important, by the way. Trial implementation basically means it's ready to be done. So for example, the refractive measurements, the one that we talked about earlier, that's at trial implementation. So don't think that, oh, that's still kind of in the works or whatever. No, no, no. That's really, it's time to be implemented for you. And yes, we want to connect things and test at connect-a-thons and so forth. One very important part of the process of IHE is the connect-a-thon. That's run every year, the week before the AEO showcase, and it's always run in Oak Brook, Illinois. We have to thank RSNA for that. They are wonderful hosts for us. They've been great for support for us for many years for our Connect-a-thon, so we need to thank them for that. But basically, this is where we really test the work together. Now, we're going to have, very soon, we're going to have our Connect-a-thon webinar. Unfortunately, I don't have the date now. We were going to, we had a date, but I made a mistake. It wasn't Lynn. Those of you that know Lynn, it was me. I was booking a date that was already double booked. So we need to work with Lynn. But I want to let you know that we are going to advertise the IHE Connect-a-thon webinar very soon. Okay, hopefully within a day or two we'll know when that is, maybe even today. Okay, so please be prepared for that. It should happen in probably about 2 weeks. This is kind of a typical timeline. Okay, so again, I don't want to do a lot of time on it, but the good thing is for this year we'll have the Connect-a-thon registration will start in August, so it's going to start soon. We need the webinar just before then to get that kicked off. The Connect-a-thon dates this year will be from the 10th to the 13th, again in Oak Brook. Then we're in Chicago for the showcase this year. At this point, I'm done. I want to thank you very much for attending the webinar. I really appreciate it, and I want to also thank all of you, all the people that have implemented IHE and have worked as a part of the committees. I know it's a big commitment, and I very much appreciate that. The Academy appreciates it. It's very important for all of us, and I want to thank you for your attention and for all of your hard work throughout the years. So thank you very much. Any more questions? Last chance for questions. Okay, I think we're done. The Connect-a-thon again. Well, oops, that's the wrong slide. So we're ready to stop now. But thank you very much. We will let you know on the Connect-a-thon very soon. And I apologize not having it for today's date.